Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Hi, welcome to another edition of Q Ideas podcast. I'm Gabe Lyons, and today we're talking about cryptocurrency. We're talking Bitcoin. We're talking about the future of currency and how we should think well about it. And this is one of those topics that obviously for many people has been on their minds for the last few years. But today it's becoming more important and more people are aware of it. More people are thinking about it. They're trying to catch up on understanding what is this discussion about cryptocurrency? Should I have some? Is it trustworthy? Is it going to just go away? How do we think about it? So we invited an expert on Bitcoin, and we created a conversation around this called A Bitcoin Future, where I interviewed Jimmy Song a year ago, specifically talking about Bitcoin, where it was going, how we should think about it. And he lays out some incredible thoughts that if you're new to this conversation, if you've thought a lot about it, I think you'll start to see what is the morality behind the idea of digital currency, of Bitcoin, of crypto? And you'll start to hear a conversation maybe from a different angle that you're not reading about anywhere, no matter where you're getting your information around currency. And so he's the author of a book called Thank God for Bitcoin, The Creation, Corruption, and Redemption of Money. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. Let's listen in now. Well, let's first talk about currency. People don't always fully understand currency. We kind of use our dollars. They buy things. They're worth a certain amount. But currency's complex. And as you've talked about the US dollar, the euro, we need to better understand how currency is used. So just give us a quick education on that.
Yeah, the current monetary system is what we would call central bank-backed fiat currency. And this is very different than what it used to be. The banknotes used to actually represent a certain amount of gold. But since 1971, when Richard Nixon cut the ties to gold, we basically had a currency that is free-floating. It's not backed by anything. So as a result, whenever the central bank, commercial banks, residential banks, whenever they loan out extra money, whether it be for a budget deficit or for corporate bonds or for a mortgage, all of that money comes into the system ex nihilo, out of nothing. And that has some serious consequences, and that's what we wrote about in Thank God for Bitcoin, among other things. But it is a highly immoral system of theft, corruption, and cronyism.
Yeah, so fiat currency is any currency that isn't backed by real gold or silver, and the U.S. has been in that situation now for 50 years. It doesn't last long for a currency to move from being truly able to be used to this position of fiat. Plenty of people are writing about how we're coming to the conclusion as we print money. You make the case that printing money is immoral. Will you just talk more about the morality of money?
Yeah, sure. So every time that money is printed, when the supply of the US dollar, for example, expands, what's actually happening is that everyone that holds that currency is being diluted just a little bit. And eventually that leads to a loss in purchasing power, like we're seeing right now in a lot of different commodities: lumber, aluminum, copper, plastics, computer chips. All of these things have gone up in price over the last year, in large part because the federal government or the Federal Reserve has expanded the money supply from something around 15.5 trillion to 19.5 trillion. And that's starting to come into the marketplace. So in essence, what's happening is that the Federal Reserve is able to print money by diluting the current holders of that money. And it's not just people in the US that are holders. It's not people, US citizens or US companies that hold the dollar. It's a lot of other people too, including other central banks, of course, who hold the dollar as a reserve currency, but also, normal people in other countries. And in fact, in some of the poorest countries in the world, they hold the US dollar as their method of savings because their currency is even worse. So places like Venezuela and Zimbabwe, for example, definitely love the US dollar and they hold it. People in North Korea even use the US dollar for black market trade because that holds its value. So in essence, every time the money is expanded, money is being stolen from these people. And and we're all complicit in this. It's not just the federal government that's deficit spending like crazy, or state governments that are deficit spending. It's also corporations that are taking out these giant loans. Those loans come into existence for the purpose of these businesses. And even when we take out our mortgages, we are essentially the bank is creating money on our behalf, thus diluting the supply of money all over the world just by a tiny bit. So every time we're taking out loans, we're essentially stealing from some of the poorest and most vulnerable people on the planet.
Let's talk about Bitcoin. I know that's where you've written your book, and you understand Bitcoin more than a lot of people and its value. Why has it become so appealing over the last 13 years?
Yeah, the appeal of Bitcoin is that it's digital gold. It's a way to store a value, but it has the convenience of a digital object. So gold doesn't require any permission for you to hold or to gather. If you want to be a gold miner in your backyard using a shovel, you can. You're not likely to find much gold, but you are allowed to do that. Whereas if you print a $20 bill in your home, you're going to get arrested by the Secret Service. So it's decentralized like gold, but it's also digital, much like most of the payment networks that exist. It makes it a lot more convenient to trade. So if you wanted to trade with gold, it would be very difficult oftentimes because you have to actually bring the gold. This is why you have so many ships that sunk with a lot of treasure on them, because they actually have to bring the gold to trade for goods and services. So as a result of that, what you have is something that's both digital and decentralized, doesn't require any permission, and therefore is a better money. And on top of that, it has an absolute scarcity. So there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, unlike the US dollar, which continues expanding roughly at around 7% a year for the last 62 years or so. And that makes it a better money for everybody because you have integrity. It doesn't allow anyone to sort of steal like you can with the Federal Reserve, where the people that have access to loans can essentially get the benefits of that expansion of money supply. With Bitcoin, you don't have that, and it's an absolute limit. It makes for a much better currency, and it's much harder to cheat.
Yeah, so Bitcoin is a currency currently that it cannot be controlled by a Federal Reserve, and that makes it hold its value, is I think what you're communicating here. But my question to you is, it seems like a lot of banks and corporations are now pretty motivated to get into cryptocurrencies. We're seeing different ones pop up that they maybe could control. Are those good? Should people be thinking about those currencies as well? Or you think, man, if you're getting into crypto, Bitcoin's the only one that's going to really give you the freedom and the value that you really want to have long term?
Yeah, so this is the big difference between Bitcoin and all of the other cryptocurrencies, which we call altcoins. They're called alternative currencies, but they have the property that they're not decentralized. They usually have a founder or a core developer team that changes the rules and sets the monetary policy. So Ethereum, which is the second largest cryptocurrency out there, has changed their monetary policy about 30 different times over the course of its lifetime. And that's not very different than the Fed. The Fed decides the monetary policy, including when to expand the money supply and when to contract the money supply. Similar things have happened in Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies that exist. So really, you don't get the benefits of decentralization as you would with Bitcoin, and that's why I'm pro Bitcoin and not really pro altcoin. Also, a lot of central banks are starting to explore this area. They're called central bank digital currencies. China, in particular, is using it as a way to create a surveillance system over its entire population and to use its social credit system as a way to deny certain people rights. I'm sure many of you have heard of the Uyghurs in China, who have been horribly oppressed in that region. Central bank digital currency would give them even more tools to track and do things like that. So I think many of these alternate conceptions of cryptocurrency are misguided and just as rife with corruption.
Well, and it also seems, Jimmy, you're arguing for a biblical view of how we even think about money, borrowing power. Talk a little bit about that view from your perspective on the biblical view of how we ought to think about money.
Yeah, so the biblical view of money is sowing and reaping, right? You reap what you sow. You sow first, you work the land, you raise the cattle, you do whatever, and then you get the rewards of whatever you work for. The current fiat system is completely backwards. Essentially, what ends up happening is that we bring consumption forward through debt. So we essentially get what we want right now, and this is at every level. This is at the retail level, at the state level, at the company level, at the federal level. Everyone gets what they want now by going into debt, and then they're enslaved for however long the term of the loan is. This is the verse in Proverbs. The borrower is servant to the lender. And that's how the entire system is kind of set up. And any parent can tell you that the better thing for a character for a kid is not to give them something and then make them pay it off later. It's to have them work for it and then get the just rewards of their sowing through reaping the rewards of their saving. Unfortunately, the current system is backwards and very corrupting to our character. And something like Bitcoin encourages saving. Sound money encourages saving and allows a more biblical playing out of what we're meant to be.
Well, Jimmy, I'm so grateful for how deep you've dove into this subject matter and how much you're helping us today. Can't you guys see a future? He's like the Dave Ramsey of Bitcoin in the future, right? He's going to help people understand how to think about digital currency and Bitcoin. Jimmy, thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing your insights. Let's thank him for his time.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you appreciated just hearing from Jimmy. Joyful, fun, and the kind of guy that is thinking ahead. Now, a year later from when he gave this talk, one of the things he specifically said, you just heard him say it, is now coming to be. And this is what I love about the way we're trying to pursue conversations at Q Ideas and with specifically our Culture Summit, which again is coming up in 2 weeks, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. We're trying to help you think a little bit ahead of maybe where everybody else is and to think well about it, about what does it mean to understand how to navigate our current culture. But he specifically said, here's his quote, he just said it, also a lot of central banks are beginning to explore this area. They're called central bank digital currencies. China in particular is using it as a way to create a surveillance system over its entire population and use its social credit system as a way to deny people rights. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the Uyghur people who have been horribly oppressed in that region. Unfortunately, the current system is backwards and very corrupting to our character. So this is what Jimmy's predicting. And now this year, what are we talking about at our Culture Summit? We're going to be talking about the Uyghurs. We're going to talk about the genocide there. We're also going to be continuing to talk about surveillance and how currencies are being used for surveillance. Many people aren't aware of the central banks beginning to create their own currencies to compete with things like Bitcoin, but this is the new future. And if you're not aware of it, we need to become aware of it. We got to be smart and think about how are we going to do transaction? Where's the line on privacy? How is this going to function? And what is the true design of these currencies? Is it really to create freedom and exchange, or is it to create some sense of control and surveillance? Jimmy points out what that future might be, but I hope you'll continue to think well about the year ahead by joining us for our Culture Summit. It's our 16th one, April 28th and 29th. It's going to be broadcast in Nashville. We're sold out here, so no more in-person tickets available, but we have people hosting all over the country, people all over the world who will be bringing together smaller communities of people to listen, to learn, to have conversations about it. You can go to qideas.org/2022 for 2022. You can get a virtual ticket for $99, and that allows you to join, and I think you would enjoy being a part of it. So we hope to see you there. Have a wonderful day.